Episode 1 Clement Butch Desmier. In the early hours of August 22nd, 2012, the people of Bradford, United Kingdom, slept soundly in their beds. In Ralston Rise, at around 3 a.m, as the homes lay still, bathed in late summer moonlight, a neighbour witnessed two dark figures approaching the home of Clement Desmier, known locally as Butch, a father of 6 and grandfather of 10. Strangely, it was said that the windows of Butch's home filled with light as the figures approached the door. As a trusting member of the local community, Butch never locked his door as evening fell. Part 1. The last known movements of Butch. On the morning of the 22nd of August, Butch had visited a local farm shop with a friend, maybe to buy some local produce to rustle up a hearty meal for that evening. After saying goodbye to his friend, as was usual for Butch, he then went shopping at his local Asda in Greengates. As always, Butch caught the bus home from the supermarket. Only a short journey away, Butch soon arrived at the end of his road, Ralston Rise, at 12:56 p.m. Nobody knows exactly where Butch went to next. For over 3 hours his movements and whereabouts were untraced. Later on that day at 4:20 p.m, Butch was seen walking to his home with a younger man. Witnesses say the unknown young man wasn't the kind of person Butch was usually seen with. He was wearing a bomber jacket and a blue baseball cap. Unfortunately, this final eyewitness account was the last time Butch was ever seen alive. Part 2. The crime. After entering the home of Butch on the 22nd of August 2012, the exact movements of then 29-year-old David Lawler and 17-year-old Nathan Jefferson were not known, but later the court heard that the killers had spent more than an hour in the house, which was crudely ransacked as they searched for money. In the evil events that unfolded in a once quiet, safe home, Butch suffered from more than 60 penetrating and prod injuries. Most were superficial, suggesting an element of torture before his death, alongside a substantial number of incised and puncture wounds and bruising to Mr. Desmier's legs and body. A number of the injuries had penetrated the right lung, 2 of which indicated severe force and were likely to have been caused by a screwdriver. A bone in the front of his neck had been fractured, and there was evidence of forceful compression of the neck, concluding that a cushion had been pressed against Mr. Desmier's face, causing him to be asphyxiated in the course of an attack. It is the conclusion of Dr. Johnson that Mr. Desmier died as a result of being asphyxiated and stabbed repeatedly. Whilst he did have things medically wrong with him, they were not the reason he died as and when he did, and Dr. Johnson is clear that the death of Mr. Desmier was caused by a sustained, violent assault. Part 3. The Discovery.
I think our next door neighbour's dead.
Okay, is there any suspicious circumstances?
The house is a mess.
if he's breathing or anything like that?
I've touched his arm, it's freezing cold.
12 hours after the crime, Karen Hutchinson had returned from work and decided to call upon Butch. She called out Butch a couple of times upon entering his home, but heard nothing. Finding this odd, she slowly pushed open the living room door. It was very dark in the room. The curtains were drawn, and the only light came from a dull orange glow from a light on a table opposite the door. To her horror, she then saw Butch sitting in a high-backed armchair. Again, she called out his name, but received no response. Butch was wearing boxer shorts and a t-shirt. His arms were across his chest, and the right side of his head was in a pillow. He was cold and stiff. The emergency services were called. Mr. Desmier was confirmed dead at the scene, and the area was officially declared a crime scene. Part 4. The Court Hearing. The jury heard that 9 days after Mr. Desmier's murder, David Lawler cut a man's throat at a party with a Stanley knife, demonstrating his tendency to become involved in violent attacks by means of bladed articles, such as knives. Soon after the murder, David Lawler is said to have told a woman that he and Nathan Jefferson had killed Mr. Desmier and disposed of a knife down a drain. Lawler later threatened that if she revealed his confession, she would have acid thrown in her face and be gang raped, the court was told. It is alleged that the woman was so terrified by Lawler that she went from a size 12 to a size 6, and the worry made her hair fall out. David Lawler was convicted by jury at Bradford Crown Court of murder and 2 offences of intimidating his former partner. Lawler must spend a minimum of 34 years in prison, and Nathan Jefferson, who turned 17 on the day he murdered Mr. Desmier, was sentenced to detention for a minimum of 16 years. Lawler was handcuffed to a prison officer during the sentencing hearing at the Crown Court, described as the dominant personality in the murder. Jefferson was living at a bail hostel in Leeds when he was befriended by 2 undercover police officers in a painstaking operation to solve the murder. He pleaded guilty to the crime when the judge ruled that covertly recorded evidence of his confession to the officers could be included in the trial. The court was told that Mr. Desmier was poor in health. He had limited mobility and suffered from heart and breathing problems. He was vulnerable by reason of his age and his illness. Lawler had shown no remorse and will not be eligible for parole until he is in his 60s. Lawler amassed a terrifying arsenal of weapons at his home, specially adapting some of them to inflict the worst possible injuries. Lawler had made a knuckle duster to pass the time and crafted a toothbrush with a blade in it because he was practicing for when he went to prison. His collection also included a baseball bat with screws in it, an axe with letters EDL scratched into it, and a broken pool cue, and a Stanley knife. Jefferson, who had suffered a dreadful childhood, was of below average intelligence and maturity. He had shown moral insight into what he had done and was only 17 at the time of the murder. Speaking outside court after the sentencing hearing, Detective Chief Superintendent Mark Ridley, who led the murder investigation, said, "Today's sentencing marks the end of a lengthy investigation into what was a brutal and sustained attack on a vulnerable man in his own home."
The last thing I think about every night is how he died. And as much as I want to believe it happened quickly, and I prayed that he wouldn't have pain, I know he did, and I know he's suffered.
That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed our debut episode. Please subscribe to hear more true crime reenactment podcasts. You can find the links to our social media and website in the description below. Until next time, always remember that hell is empty and all the devils are here.